Welcome to yet another edition of Foreign Correspondents. I'm Min Sani and with me on set is our group of foreign correspondents. Welcome to the show.
Good to be back again.
Thank you.
Now, it's December and the month is lined up with many events to mark the end of the year, both on a personal level with friends and family and on a more professional level where work is concerned. Now, aside from all this, what were some of the stories that kept you occupied this week? Marcus, we'll start with you.
Well, I've been looking at the questioning of the conglomerate chiefs that's been going on this week.
오늘날 이런 사태가 된 데 대해서 참으로 부끄럽고 죄송하게 생각합니다.
I thought that was a very interesting and very unusual event, so I've been looking at that mostly.
Yes, definitely, because they're very private people and seeing them on television all at the same time was quite an experience. What about you, Frank?
Well, I've been covering the protests again this week. I seem to be working every single Saturday night for the past month and a half. I hope that comes to an end sometime soon, but it's been a really fascinating experience seeing how Koreans are sort of standing up and fighting for democracy in their country.
Atta?
I was also covering the case, and it was like kind of historic. The fact that the big chiefs of the table in this country, or the big conglomerates, were to declare in a public audience.
때는
기억이 나지 않습니까?
일일이 그런 문화 지원이라든지 스포츠 지원을 저한테 다 일일이 보고를 하지 않습니다.
총 투표수 299표 중 가 234표, 부 56표, 기권 2표, 무효 7표로서 대통령 박근혜 탄핵 소추안은 가결되었음을 선포합니다.
That day was the highlight of the week, I think.
Right. So we have mentioned it quite a few times on our previous shows and today as well. I'm talking about the protests here at Gwanghwamun Square every Saturday night that began late October. In this edition of Foreign Correspondents, we take a look at the remarkable shift in the culture of protests here in Korea amid the presence of candlelight vigils.
On Saturday, December 3rd, a sea of candles light up the streets of Gwanghwamun Square. Another candlelight protest has just commenced. The first candlelight rally against a recent political scandal took place on October 29th, and this is the sixth gathering. According to organizers, about 1.7 million people gathered in Gwanghwamun, with an estimated 2.3 million coming together across the nation. The age groups of protesters are diverse, ranging from students to young parents with children and the elderly. They've gathered to demand the truth behind the Treasury scandal be uncovered and to call on President Park Geun-hye to step down. Despite the serious nature of the political issues at hand, the atmosphere at these rallies is calm and measured.
꺼지지 않는 촛불을 의미하고자 이 가면을 만들어서 쓰고 나왔습니다.
Each time protesters deliver messages loaded with humor and satire. People also sing together almost like at a festival. At the end of the protest, many stay behind to clean up, reflecting the people's greater commitment to their civic duties. Although organizers estimate that over 1 million people have come together in protest, not a single police arrest has been made. These peaceful protests have also been receiving attention worldwide from various foreign media outlets. Longing for change and hope, people have lit up their candles and taken to the streets. We now sit down to discuss the current state of events and the significance behind the Candlelight protests.
Right, now Frank, you mentioned it also. You've been covering and are still covering the Candlelight vigils here in Korea for your respective media organizations. What was it like being here in person?
Well, it was amazing, just the sheer numbers of people that had come out. I mean, the square that we're in now, it was packed, person to person, shoulder to shoulder, every single night for the last, Saturday night for the last month and a half. And to see all of those people really manage to get along without what I saw so much as a quarrel was kind of amazing.
When you see these kind of demonstrations in Europe or in the US, you see that some small groups that they are like more violent, or they make trouble, or they break things. Here in Korea, everyone was like pretty tidy, and you can see that everything is very well organized compared to other places.
Back in Canada, you'd only get a protest this size if your hockey team lost in the Stanley Cup, and then the protest would end up with some police cars being overturned and some shops being vandalized. But you didn't see any of that kind of behavior here for the past Saturday nights. And again, to see hundreds of thousands of people out was really overwhelming experience.
Yeah, and you can also see how this is resonating around the world, how people are really paying attention to the scale of these protests here in Seoul. I see on social media people in Scandinavia who are just amazed by the scale of the protest, and also by how peacefully they're being conducted, and that people even are cleaning up after themselves afterwards. That seems to be something that a lot of people are very amazed by.
Right. Frank, at these peaceful protests, we also see foreigners taking part. What do you think is the reason for their participation?
Well, I don't know if they're participating from a political perspective. I know, from a legal point of view, you should caution foreigners to participate in political activities here in South Korea unless they have some sort of official capacity. But I think this is really an historic time here in South Korea. If you're a tourist, I would definitely, come out, and I would want to see what's going on here. It's such an interesting time to be part or bear witness to this historic moment in South Korea's democratic development.
I see.
There have been demonstrations in Korea in the history, but never such big demonstrations in such a long time. It's been already 6 weekends with a really huge demonstration and people going to the streets in those protests. So the future generations will study this in their textbooks. So it's a beautiful time to be a journalist here, actually.
I see. Marcus, also present at these rallies are students in uniform and even toddlers in pushchairs or strollers. What is your view on the presence of these very young members of society at these events?
Well, I think it's a great idea to bring your kids to these kinds of events. I mean, as long as they're conducted peacefully, which they have so far. So I think it's a great idea that people bring their kids, because that's an occasion to talk about democracy, to talk about the right to vote, and that everybody has a voice when you live in a democracy. I haven't brought my oldest son, he's almost 5. I haven't brought him to any of the protests because I've been working when I've been going here, but I've been talking to him about what a democracy means and about how you're able to vote for your candidate. And then even if that candidate doesn't turn out the way you were hoping, then you can actually take to the street and protest. And that's a good thing as long as you do it in a peaceful manner. So for me, it's been a great occasion, and I'm sure it has for many people who live here, to talk to their kids about what it means to be in a democracy.
And do you agree?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Actually, when I was a child, my parents took me to some demonstrations, some big demonstrations, and I have beautiful memories of them, and also I got to be a little bit conscious about politics, about how the world works. So I think it's very good for children to participate in those kind of things.
So there are candlelight vigils in Spain as well?
Yeah. I remember, for example, I went to the protest against the first Iraq war I guess it was in 1990 or something like that, 1991.
1990,
Yeah. So I remember that I was like 9 years old. My mom took me there, and I was amazed about how many people were there, what were they saying. I was asking questions to my parents, questions to the people that were there, so I could get some knowledge as a kid and also keep a nice memory that now I can remember.
You know, we talked about this, I think, in one of our previous episodes. You know, any activity that's going to encourage civic participation, I think I would have to support. You know, some people may be worried, they're indoctrinating their children into be, some one side or another side of the political spectrum. You know, I don't think that's necessarily the case, and generations tend to follow the political perspective of their parents. But most importantly, I think it encourages civic participation beyond just voting. It's important for people to understand their participation in a democratic society can go beyond voting. And in this case, it needs to go beyond voting, I think.
Right. I think the Candlelight Vigils are also providing to be a great opportunity to approach the issue of politics, social affairs with children and getting them interested in the matter. Now, apart from the vigils here in Korea, there are Koreans outside of the country who are also taking part in these rallies.
더 같이 힘을 내서 사실은 지금까지 모든 잃어버린 국민의 주권을 되찾고요.
Do you believe that their participation is also contributing to the momentum here, Marcus?
I think they could. I mean, there's a large Korean diaspora around the world, and I think it makes sense for Koreans abroad to show their support of the families and friends that they have that live here, and show that they're really concerned about the political development of their home country. So sure, I think that certainly adds to the feeling you get that this is really a mass people's movement of Koreans, not just in the country, but also outside.
Also, Koreans are very self-conscious about their identity. So Koreans abroad, even if they are not here, just watching the news every day or suffering the things that the Koreans in their own country are suffering, they are very conscious about it. They want to demonstrate, they want to participate in the political changes, and they feel it as if they were here.
And I think we also need to recognize the purpose of these protests. The purpose of these protests is to try to replace the president of South Korea that has something like a 5% approval rating. Now, that rating translates into her position on the international stage. When those protests take place in other countries, the position of the leader of that country is dramatically weakened. South Korea is very concerned about its position on the international stage. So when the leader of South Korea, currently Park Geun-hye, goes overseas, given the turmoil that she's undergoing here now, her position is weakened, and those demonstrations in other countries also contribute, I think, tremendously to what's going on here.
The change in the culture of protests is also visible elsewhere around the world, and in this next report we take a look at a report where many, like their Korean counterparts, have chosen peace over violence to express their opposition to certain matters.
A demonstration can be defined as a group of people publicly expressing objection through a rally or a march. In the past, violent clashes between protesters and the police often erupted. But with the turn of the century, candlelight protests have become a peaceful means of demonstration by Koreans. This peaceful rally is not unique to Korea. At protests across the globe, it's not difficult to find candles representing non-violent resistance. Other various tools are also used for peaceful demonstration. In 2013 and 2014, thousands of anti-government protesters in Bangkok gave red roses to police officers expressing their spirit of non-violence. In 2014, in Ukraine, some participants held mirrors in their hands to force police to look at reflections of themselves holding weapons. In Turkey, Canada and Argentina, banging on pots and pans has been a way to create noise and draw attention to specific problems. Last year in Paris, where the UN Climate Change Conference was held, environmental activists laid out hundreds of shoes to symbolize their frustration towards the ban on public demonstrations. Meanwhile, in April 2015, a unique protest that made physical conflict virtually impossible took place in front of the Spanish Parliament building. While slogans were shouted and placards raised, protesters were not actually on site for the world's first hologram protest. Spanish activists intentionally staged this virtual political rally against a controversial law banning protests outside government buildings.
A really hard attack to the base of the democracy, the freedom of expression, the freedom of demonstrating people, the freedom of getting freely the information.
Peaceful demonstrations are taking place in various countries across the world. By rejecting the use of force and promoting peace instead, participants have managed to shed more light on the fundamental values of democracy.
Now, we just saw in the report there are remarkable transformations in how the public voices its opposition to certain issues elsewhere around the world. Atta, before we delve any further, could you tell us a bit more about Spain's first virtual protest which took place last year?
Yeah, actually, it was a very historic time because there was a very big turmoil in the politics of the country, with a lot of corruption, with the economy going really bad, and lots of people went to the street. They made kind of a really big movement. Inside that, the government banned some kind of demonstration. They put some laws against the freedom of expression. So there was a hologram protest just to ask the government, like to show the government that people is against freedom of expression, and if they keep like that, there should be a holograms and not people going to protest. It was very, very meaningful, very nice. And actually this year in Korea they did it here. They kind of copied the idea, and Amnesty International made in this exact place a hologram protest to complain about the lack of the freedom of expression in some politics of this government.
Right. Despite the recent positive changes in the culture of protest here in Korea, there are still some who voice strong aversion to these protests, claiming that they are a disruption to business and to transportation. What is the view of protests among people in your country, Marcus?
Well, protests are still in Northern Europe, are still connected to, associated to the peace movement, I think, in the 60s and 70s. So they're thought of as something that mostly takes place on the left wing of the political spectrum. And still there are associations to the 60s and 70s, where we saw some large public protests against the Vietnam War. In Scandinavia, where I'm from, we saw protests against nuclear power plants. They're planning to build nuclear power plants. But then the culture changed a little bit in the 80s, where we saw groups of more radical, militant nature on the left wing started doing protests against the housing politics in Europe. So this happened all over Europe in the 80s and 90s. We had squatters who occupied abandoned buildings, and then when the police would come and try to evict them, they would organize protests, and then they would clash with the police. So it still has that negative connotation.
I see. What about in Canada, Frank?
Well, in Canada, the biggest protests I think of in recent memory there would have been against the Iraq War. One of the things that's peculiar to South Korea is that you have so many people able to transport themselves to any type of protest or demonstration activity. Canada is such a huge country, it takes hours just to fly from one city to another. There's not a huge metropolis of 20 million people in the country that would bring out, hundreds of thousands to gather. We're more likely, as I mentioned, to have a protest if our team lost a hockey game.
I would like to say that in Spain we have a protest culture very similar to the Korean one, because we had 40 years of dictatorship, 40 years that we couldn't go to the street to protest. I was not alive at that moment. It finished in 1975. But after that, people realized that they have the right to protest. So we have that kind of culture of going to the streets, protest, and make it even a festivity, you know, to protest against the government or against something that people think that they have to complain for. So in that case, people go to the street the same way as they go here in Korea.
I see. Frank, some have also chosen to engage on the online platforms, including Facebook and Twitter, to express their views. What are your thoughts on this?
You know, I think it's great. The other day, one of the protests, I went to a pro-park protest, and there was a bit of a scuffle there, and then somebody with a handphone that was filming me was asking me what side of the protest I was on, and my news assistant was panicking. Oh, I'm on TV, I don't want to be on TV. But I was like, that's okay, don't worry about it. She can do what she wants to do, and I'm a journalist, and so, you know, I have to understand that I'm going to be out there in the media. Any form of civic participation, absolutely, you know, I support.
And these days the way of protesting has changed, you know, with the new technology. So now you can even protest online if you cannot go, and you can make a big, really big force, you know, like together with some people. If you have the same idea, you can make it online, and you can even make a current of opinion without even going to the street.
These technologies are great. I mean, one-man media here in South Korea, I think that term might even be a Korean term. One-man media, where one person, or we should call it, I guess, one-person media, one person can really, you know, engage subculture and create an audience and get their views out there using new technology in ways that we couldn't have imagined before. And I think it empowers democracy.
I would have to agree with you there, Frank. Going back to the Candlelight visuals then, do you suppose that these visuals will ultimately secure their purpose? Will the people's message be sent across strongly? Marcus, what do you think?
I think they're very effective. I think when you see these images on TV of the whole center of Seoul, where we're sitting now, one big crowd of people coming together to do these protests, I think it's a very, very powerful kind of protest. So I think it's very, very efficient.
Frank, what about you?
Absolutely. I think that the people of South Korea, those people that are coming out demonstrating, they're driving officials to execute their duties. They're driving the media to investigate this story more carefully. They're the ones that are responsible for, you know, cleaning up this whole scandal. And you know, a lot of people say it's the media and they're now starting to do their job, or the prosecution has changed the sort of politicization of their offices, and now they're executing their duties. They're only doing that because hundreds of thousands of people are coming out to this square to make sure that they do their jobs.
Hundreds of thousands of people went to the street, and then millions. It just gives the idea of how big the scandal is. Because at first you couldn't really know a lot, because there was some evidences, some things with the prosecution, some suppositions that they were true or not. But then when millions of people came to the streets, you could know how big this is, and how big it is not only for the political case, just for the whole Korean society.
Right. Now today, despite the freezing temperatures, we are gathered here at the venue of these Candlelight visuals in Gwanghwamun Square. Before we end the program, are there any final words that you would like to add? We'll start with you, Marcus.
Well, I think that it's been an amazing time to be a correspondent in South Korea, to be able to cover these protests and to able to see this these many groups of people coming together in a common cause. If you are going to say something a little bit more pessimistic, it's going to be interesting to see what happens next, right? Because even though you see a lot of people coming together in support of wanting to get rid of President Park Geun-hye, that doesn't mean that these groups of people agree on what's going to happen next, and that's going to be interesting to follow as well.
I see. What about you, Alta?
Well, I think these demonstrations, these historic events, they showed how big the power of the people is, and I hope that those people that are here now, in the future, they will feel that they contribute to make their country a little bit better.
Yes, absolutely. I have to agree with Ada on that part. The power of the people has really been demonstrated here, not just for South Korea, but I think around the world, and the power of peaceful protest to initiate change and democratization in your country is something that South Korea really can show other countries.
Right. According to French political scientist Tocqueville, the health of a democratic society may be measured by the quality of functions performed by private citizens. And in this respect, I believe people here have well demonstrated, in fact brilliantly shown, Korea's state of democracy. Thank you for watching.